was in like the middle of Italy somewhere, and there's this flea market, and like bought all this stuff. The joy of figuring out how to get it back to America. You get this crazy story of this a million-year-old guy who has this like blue truck. He's gonna show up. He's on a flip phone, but like all the pieces somehow make it onto his truck that then make it to the place. Like that to me is part of the thrill in terms of like your problem solving.
What begins as childhood exploration, rearranging a bedroom just to see how it feels, can evolve into an entire way of life. From shaping worlds at Ralph Lauren to designing boutique hotels with Ash, Will Cooper has always led with instinct and discernment. In this episode of Surroundings, we visit the New York-based designer whose East Village apartment is both home and test lab for his brand William White. We talk about designing for necessity, why commerce shouldn't kill curiosity, and how some things are better discovered offline.
I grew up in Texas. Somehow I was always impacted by environment. I was always arranging and rearranging my room. I think from a young age, I was afforded the opportunity to explore, and my parents kind of let me have that creative freedom. When I was like 10 and a half, I started my first company. It was called Party Players Productions. I started this DJ business.
You were 10?
I was 10 and a half, yeah. I told my parents, I was like, as soon as I finish school, when I was 10, as soon as I finish school, I'm moving to New York because the people walk as fast as I do here, and they know how to live, and I'm coming. Before I moved here, I started writing these like lists of things that were essential to live, things to get dressed, essential things to live in your home. What is like the playbook, you know, in terms of what things you actually need. I was like very specific that I needed like a rectilinear space, or like something that I could programmatically make sense of. And so I looked forever and ever and found this. It made sense. I loved the East Village. It had all the trappings of what I needed in a space. This is when I started like toying around with white for the first time. You'll see in like the draped entry, it becomes not a closed space, but it has the ability to be closed. And so I think I created a system throughout the whole place where all the drapery panels can be hung or unhung and create different environments in different rooms. When I took this space, it started becoming this laboratory essentially of exploration, and it's been many different iterations.
Like there's something about it that feels so theatrical.
Yes.
But I think it's also very practical.
And so you have curtains coming up and coming down, and you have bedrooms coming in and coming out. And I feel like that in and of itself is the theatrics. If you think about a stage set, so many different things happen. And kind of, I think about life and interiors also as a stage set, but they all have to function.
I mean, it goes back to the rearranging of the bedroom as a child too.
Yes.
It's always interesting when you like think back, the hindsight of it, because as a kid you're like, I don't know, I'm just rearranging my bedroom. I don't know, like the feng shui is off or something, like something feels off, and you're like, let me just try this. And it's kind of this experimenting as a kid that like leads to potentially what you end up spending your life working. Like as a kid, you didn't even know that was a job,
right? Or
you didn't know that there could be a job in what you were doing,
right? Back then, design was not necessarily in the zeitgeist. It wasn't something that was for everyone. But back then, you're kind of like, oh, is this something? Am I understanding creativity vis-a-vis this exploration of space? When I'm working on external projects, or if I'm working on pieces for the William White brand, everything kind of begins as an idea here. I can think here very well. I like blurring the lines of not really giving definition to surface. I think mirror is a good architectural framework because it's reflecting light all the time, and it gives like this infinity almost to space. It allows for depth, and so I think mirror is the theme, white is the theme, drapery is the theme. The pillow chair, if you recall, the first ever pillow chair was here in red and white stripes. One of the very first prototypes that became the dining tables for me worked because it kind of functions as a tea table. It has to work for me when it's at home. Like if it doesn't work for me, then I know it's not going to work for other people. And so like I kind of am my own guinea pig, and then identifying the issues as to like what is happening within that, and then bringing it here, workshopping it, and then getting it out into the world.
Tell me about the early days of Will Cooper in New York.
I started to see the world of Ralph Lauren behind the curtain, I guess, if we're using curtain as a metaphor. So I was always enamored with, retail and performance in retail, and Ralph really did an amazing job at storytelling. It was very monumental in my, career to be at the school of Ralph Lauren. I sat kind of between the worlds of art and commerce there. You learn customer behaviors, you learn what works, what doesn't work, what things are selling, what things are not selling, and like you actually have ears to the ground. You learn the value of brand, how brand, halos the entire idea of product.
Well, the world building of it is
Correct.
is I think the magic of Ralph Lauren.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was the master at world building. And like at that time period, there was Giorgio Armani doing the same thing, but Italian style. Those are North Star references in terms of where we eventually get to with William White. I eventually got the courage to leave Ralph Lauren, joined Ari and Jonathan, and built this world of Ash.
And it started as really just strictly staging.
Correct. And like really when you're doing staging, the way that we approached staging was storytelling, and that like we would write these stories of the people that would theoretically move in there. And so you're creating narrative around the fantasy or like ideal customer, client, guest, whatever that's going into that space. No different than a hotel.
But operating a hotel is
very
much
different.
different.
Very, very different. Okay, let's just like schlock this thing together, like figure it out, open it. We were working literally around the clock, like nailing carpets down at 4 a.m. Up until the point of opening. I remember learning SketchUp, like making furniture in SketchUp, like making up how to do these rooms, finding random people in Providence to make things, but with aspirations of grandeur. And then we kind of loved it. It was like such a high doing that, and so we did it again and again and again. Learning as we went along, getting a little bit more advanced in terms of design and knowing how to make things, and eventually, milling our own textiles and making all of our own furniture, like fully everything custom that went into the hotel, with the exception of vintage and antiques. It was like really full world building. I got to travel so much and see the world and go to these far-flung places and see and bring back so many different influences and meld them with the world that we were creating that was site-specific to that environment. When I began thinking about William White was that list from 10, 15 years ago, and I was like, what are the essential things that need to happen for someone to get dressed, to live, to eat, to sleep, to work. The story was about how material can kind of take any shape. So this could be upholstery, it could be drapery, it could be a lamp, it could be a shirt, it could be a bed cover, it could be a tablecloth. And so it's like blending the world of interiors and apparel and home and lifestyle and all these things, because in my opinion, one should be a reflection of the other. William is obviously me, and White is obviously the idea of blank canvas and the concept that I've been wrestling with for a long time. If you recall, in my apartment, I talked about using white on all surfaces. So this is the same technique, but in using fabric. The 9-to-5 kind of mentality, especially in New York, in the creative realm, doesn't really exist. And so like your work is a reflection of your life, and your life is a reflection of your work, and you're not really clocking out. You're like always on. And that in creating this space, that's what the intellectual intent was. Canal Street is just out the window, and you're removed from the chaos of every day. And so it's almost like a pause and a reset.
And it's so immersive in a way that, like, if you go to a gallery, in most cases, you're looking at a painting on the wall, and it's beautiful and it's lovely, but you walk away from it and you are no longer in like that scene.
Right.
But wherever you look in this room, you're like still part of the scene. How do you want people to feel?
I mean, I guess to boil it down to the most simple is to just feel something. When we launched, it was, you mentioned the typewriter. It's like everything was handwritten. There was only a phone line, a landline that you could call to get an appointment to visit. There was no photos, there was no press, there was no website, there was no e-commerce, there was nothing. So it was like really about discovering something for the first time, with mystery, with romance, and like having to like unearth something, as opposed to like seeing all the pictures before you go to this place and then knowing exactly what's going to happen.
And it's the same, I mean, it feels very similar to like when you're going to the flea markets in the south of France, like you're not clicking into First Dibs before you get there to see what's going to be there. Like you have to physically be there.
Discover. We've like lost this ability to be human beings and pick up the phone and call, or like actually do a bit of the work. Everything's
the research that like goes into finding something special.
Right.
But I imagine like everything else in your space, there's stories behind each. How do you think about what you put in your space? Art
is very specific because I think it carries an energy, and so when I'm putting art in here, it's very personal, and so I know each artist that's here For a period of time, maybe still, I could tell you which piece was in every single hotel room of every hotel that I did. We handpicked every single piece, and I knew what room we put it in. And like that, there's a memory tied to everything that we purchased. A little talisman of your time there, and like every time you look at it, you see a little memory that pops up, or a collection, or a person, or an idea that transpired from picking that thing to come back with you. Thinking about the Oscars party, I approached it like any project. I think I wrote a whole brief on what the feeling was. This year specifically, we did this sunken living room very similar to this. I witnessed people this year, talking about how amazing it made them feel. And because we put this huge sunken living room right at the entrance, and nobody wanted to leave. It does make you feel like you're doing something different.
That speaks quite highly, obviously, to the work that you do,
right,
and the ability that you have to create surroundings that make people feel a certain way,
right,
and that people are then taking the time in those moments to actually talk about that feeling.
When it's rooted in like an intellectual idea, and then that permeates all the way up, we know that we've done a good job.
Yeah. How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing. When I launched William White, I began with a different way of doing things and approaching the factories in a different way, especially apparel and things that are done in a very specific way on a calendar, on this, that, and the other. But it's like by actually challenging the rules a little bit and like asking questions, like why is it done this way? Like very few people
no one's ever
question it. They just roll through.
Go with it.
Yeah, and so then you like throw your wrench into the system, and then start asking questions like, oh, there is a different way of doing things, and that then begets newness in a way, and like, or a different way of doing things, and then you create something that it feels different than everything else that's already happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beginning of success.